Nobody tells you this when you start gardening. They tell you to fertilize. They tell you plants need food. They tell you more food means more growth. And that's true. More nitrogen does mean more growth. But growth and fruit are not the same thing. They're opposite signals in a plant. When nitrogen is high, the plant stays in vegetative mode. It builds leaves, it builds stems, it builds height. It thinks it's still growing. It hasn't received the signal to reproduce yet. Phosphorus and potassium send that signal. They tell the plant, stop growing, start fruiting. But if nitrogen is drowning out that signal, if you keep dumping 24% nitrogen every 2 weeks, the plant never switches. It stays in leaf mode forever. It'll be the tallest, greenest, most beautiful plant in your garden, and it will die in October having never produced a single fruit. That's not bad luck. That's chemistry. Last year I pulled just over 60 pounds of ripe tomatoes and peppers off a single 12-foot raised bed. And the year before that, same bed, same soil, same seeds, same sun. I barely got enough to fill a colander. The plants were massive. I mean, genuinely impressive looking. Dark green leaves, thick stems, 6 feet tall by early July, and almost nothing hanging from them. A few flowers that dropped before they set. A handful of tiny tomatoes that never fully ripened. My peppers were even worse. Beautiful bushes. Not a single pepper. I blamed the heat. I blamed the variety. I blamed the bees for not pollinating. I tried calcium supplements. I tried Epsom salts. I sprayed things I found on Pinterest. None of it worked. Because none of it was the actual problem. The actual problem was sitting in my garage on a shelf next to the hose reel. A green box of Miracle Grow all-purpose water-soluble plant food. NPK ratio 24:8:16. I'd been feeding my entire vegetable garden with it every 2 weeks since May, exactly the way the label told me to. And that label, that ratio, that schedule is the single reason my garden looked like a jungle and produced like a desert. And here is what is going to surprise you. The fertilizer mistake that is silently destroying your vegetable harvest right now is not under-fertilizing. It is not using the wrong brand. It is using a fertilizer with way too much nitrogen relative to phosphorus and potassium on plants that are supposed to be fruiting. And once you understand why this matters, you will never look at a fertilizer label the same way again. So let me back up and explain the science, because I did not figure this out from a gardening blog. I figured it out after reading a page on the University of California Integrated Pest Management website that changed everything. It says, and I am quoting directly, "Excessive nitrogen causes fruiting plants to produce relatively more foliage, reducing their fruit production and delaying fruit maturity." Michigan State University Extension says almost the same thing. Their response to excess levels of nitrogen is to grow more plant, which potentially leads to increased disease problems and later production. A 12-year study published in Frontiers in Microbiology in 2022 found that long-term overfertilization with nitrogen actually decreased tomato yield. Not plateaued it, decreased it. And at the same time, it dropped the soil pH by 1.37 units and increased soil salinity, making the growing environment worse every single season. This is published, peer-reviewed, university-backed science, and the best-selling fertilizer in America has 3 times more nitrogen than phosphorus. 3 times. And it says all-purpose on the box. If you have been doing this, I want you to hear me clearly. You are not a bad gardener. You are doing what almost everyone does. You just have not been told the part nobody talks about. So let me tell you. Here's the part nobody talks about. Every plant has 2 modes, vegetative and generative. Vegetative mode is when the plant is building its body. Leaves, stems, branches, height. It is growing. It is getting bigger. It is putting on mass. Generative mode is when the plant shifts its energy toward reproduction. Flowers, pollination, fruit set, seed development. This is where your tomatoes come from. This is where your peppers, your squash, your cucumbers, your beans all come from. Nitrogen is the fuel for vegetative mode. It drives chlorophyll production. It makes leaves darker and bigger. It pushes stems taller and thicker. Phosphorus drives root development, flower formation, and the transition into generative mode. Potassium drives fruit quality, disease resistance, and sugar content. The plant needs all 3, but in different amounts at different times. Early in the season, when the plant is young and small and building its structure, nitrogen is helpful. It gets the frame up. But once that frame is built, once the plant has reached a good size and is ready to flower, it needs the signal to switch. And that signal comes from a shift in nutrient balance. Less nitrogen, more phosphorus, more potassium. When you keep pouring high nitrogen fertilizer on a plant that is ready to fruit, you are overriding that switch. You are telling the plant, keep growing, do not flower yet. There is still nitrogen here. Build more leaves. And the plant listens. It always listens. It is a chemistry machine. It does not know what you want. It responds to what you give it. Now, let me walk you through exactly what I changed and how it tripled my harvest in one season. Because once I understood the science, the fix was embarrassingly simple. The first thing I did was stop using all-purpose fertilizer after the first 3 weeks. During transplant and the first few weeks of growth, a balanced or slightly nitrogen-forward fertilizer is fine. The plant needs it to build its initial structure. I use a 10-10-10 or a 5-5-5 during that window, small doses, just enough to give the seedlings a boost without flooding the root zone. The second thing I did was switch to a low nitrogen, high phosphorus, and potassium fertilizer the moment I saw the first flower buds forming. This is the critical window. When you see those first tiny yellow flowers starting to appear on your tomato plant, that is the plant telling you it is ready to switch. And you need to support that switch by changing what you feed it. I moved to a 5 to 10-10 ratio. Some people use 4-8-12 or 3-9-9. The exact numbers matter less than the principle. The first number, nitrogen, should be noticeably lower than the second and third. You are telling the plant, I see you. Flower, fruit, I will support that. Bone meal is an excellent organic source of phosphorus. I work about 2 tablespoons into the top inch of soil around each plant when the first flowers appear. Potassium sulfate is a clean source of potassium. A tablespoon dissolved in a gallon of water every 2 weeks does the job. If you want something simpler, a tomato-specific fertilizer usually has the ratio already adjusted. Look for anything where the first number is lower than the second or third. Stay away from anything where the first number is the biggest. The third thing I did was flush the excess nitrogen that had already built up in my beds from years of all-purpose feeding. This is the step most people skip because they do not realize the nitrogen is still sitting there. I deep-watered every bed with plain water, no fertilizer, twice a week for about 2 weeks before I switched to the new feeding schedule. Nitrogen is water-soluble. It moves with moisture. Deep watering pushes it down below the root zone where it stops affecting the plant. If you have been using high nitrogen fertilizer for more than one season, your soil almost certainly has a surplus. You can get a soil test to confirm it, but honestly, if your plants are dark green, leafy, tall, and not fruiting, the evidence is already in front of you. The fourth thing I did was stop feeding on a fixed schedule and start feeding on condition. The label says every 1 to 2 weeks. But your plant does not check a calendar. It responds to what is happening in the soil. I started watching the plant instead of the box. If the leaves looked healthy and the flowers were setting, I left it alone. If the fruit was sizing up nicely, I gave a light potassium boost. If the lower leaves started yellowing, I gave a small nitrogen touch-up. Feeding became a conversation with the plant instead of a routine. And here is where this gets almost unfair. Once I made these 4 changes, the results were not subtle, they were dramatic. My tomatoes went from barely fruiting to setting clusters of 6 and 8. My peppers, which had been beautiful green bushes with 0 peppers for 2 straight years, suddenly loaded up. My squash plants set fruit on almost every flower instead of dropping them. I went from being the guy in the neighborhood with the most impressive-looking garden and the most embarrassing harvest to pulling more food off one raised bed than I knew what to do with. Now let me show you the specific signs that tell you your garden is stuck in nitrogen overload right now, because the symptoms are hiding in plain sight and most people misrate every single one of them. The first sign is abnormally dark green leaves. Not healthy green. Dark green. Almost waxy looking. If your tomato leaves look darker than they should, almost like they have been painted, that is textbook nitrogen excess. The University of California IPM describes it as thickened and sometimes cupped leaves with atypically deep green color. The second sign is tons of vegetative growth with no flowers, or flowers that drop before setting. If your plant is 4 or 5 feet tall by mid-June and has not set a single fruit, nitrogen is almost certainly the reason. The plant is locked in grow mode. It has not received permission to reproduce. The third sign is leaf curling, not the gentle afternoon droop from heat. I mean, leaves that are curled inward like little tubes, edges rolling down and under. This can signal nitrogen toxicity, especially if the leaves are also dark green and the stems are unusually thick. The fourth sign is increased pest problems, especially aphids and whiteflies. Excess nitrogen makes leaves more succulent, softer, and more attractive to sap-sucking insects. If you're suddenly dealing with pest explosions you did not have before, check your fertilizer ratio before you reach for the pesticide. The fifth sign is blossom end rot that calcium supplements do not fix. This surprises people, but excess nitrogen interferes with calcium uptake. The plant cannot move calcium efficiently to the fruit when nitrogen is too high, even if the calcium is right there in the soil. So you add more calcium and nothing changes because the bottleneck was never calcium. It was nitrogen blocking the delivery. If you are seeing 2 or more of these signs, your garden is almost certainly in nitrogen overload. And the fix is not to stop fertilizing. It is to change what you fertilize with and when. Before I wrap up, let me give you one more trick that I wish someone had told me 10 years ago. It is free, it is simple, and it delivers potassium directly to your fruiting plants without buying a single product. Take your banana peels, the ones you throw in the trash or the compost bin every week. Banana peels are 42% potassium by dry weight. That is one of the highest natural potassium sources available. Chop 3 or 4 peels into small pieces, soak them in a gallon of water for 48 hours, then strain the liquid and water your tomatoes and peppers with it. Once a week, during the fruiting stage, you're giving the plant exactly the nutrient it needs to set fruit and develop sugar from something you were already throwing away. I run this alongside the bone meal top dressing and the reduced nitrogen schedule, and the difference in fruit flavor alone is worth it. Sweeter tomatoes, thicker walled peppers, more consistent fruit set across the entire season. So if you take just one thing away from this today, let it be this. Your fertilizer label is not lying to you, but it is not telling you the whole truth either. 24, 8, Titan 16 is not all-purpose. It is a leaf-growing formula, and if you are feeding it to tomatoes, peppers, squash, cucumbers, beans, or any plant you're growing for fruit, you're chemically telling that plant to build a jungle instead of a harvest. The plant is not broken. It is doing exactly what you asked it to do. You just did not know you were asking. Switch the ratio, lower the nitrogen, raise the phosphorus and potassium. Feed on condition, not on schedule. Flush the buildup, watch the plant, trust the chemistry. That 60-pound harvest I told you about at the start was not a special variety. It was not a magic soil mix. It was the right nutrient at the right ratio at the right time. And the year before, when I barely got a colander full, I was doing everything right, except the one thing that mattered most. I was feeding my plants into a trap they could not escape. And I did not even know it. I would love to hear what your garden does when you try this. Drop a comment and let me know what you have been feeding your plants and what happened. And if you know a fellow gardener who has beautiful plants and no fruit, send them this, because they are probably one fertilizer switch away from the best harvest of their life. Until next time, keep growing.